Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, Miami Book Fair, and all of us at Books and Books in Miami, Florida, I welcome you to a virtual evening with Elizabeth McCracken to discuss the Souvenir Museum Stories, a new collection that features her most vibrant and heartrending work to date. Elizabeth McCracken is the author of 7 books, including Bowl Away and Thunderstruck and Other Stories, winner of the 2014 Story Prize and longlisted for the National Book Award, and The Giant's House, a National Book Award finalist. Her stories have appeared in Best American Short Stories, won 3 Pushcart Prizes, a National Magazine Award, and an O. Henry Prize. She has served on the faculty at the Iowa Writers Workshop and currently holds the James Missioner Chair for Fiction at the University of Texas at Austin. To moderate tonight's conversation, we're joined by the wonderful Karen Russell. Karen won the 2012 and the 2018 National Magazine Award for Fiction, and her first novel, Swamplandia, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. She has received a MacArthur Fellowship and a Guggenheim Fellowship, the 5 Under 35 Prize from the National Book Foundation, the New York Public Library Young Lions Award, the Bard Fiction Prize, and is a former fellow of the Cullman Center and the American Academy in Berlin. She currently holds the endowed chair at Texas State University's MFA program and lives in Portland, Oregon. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by clicking the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of the Souvenir Museum or any other book you might need from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Welcome, welcome.
Yay! We made it.
We made it.
Hi. Can I introduce you to somebody really quick? Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Christina. But this, guys, I was supposed to have brunch with Elizabeth McCracken right around this time last year. And I still feel like that was one of the great losses of COVID for me personally. So this is Ada, who Elizabeth never got to meet.
Ada! Oh, you're so wonderful.
She's the best. All right. She loves your cover so much. I mean, she gnaws on it mostly, but she loves this. I also love this cover so much.
I like it for its appeal to the under 4 set.
Yeah, and she just keeps in the accusatory way, of toddler. She says, "Dog, dog," accuse.
You said I want to introduce you to somebody, and I was like, "Who?" And then I realized what you were going to do, and I guessed with happiness.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I set it up like some strange great expectations, like, here's your benefactor.
It was good to make me worry. And then go, no, this is somebody I want to meet.
Well, anyway, so I was in Austin, sort of when the world shut down, and very sad. I think I really held out hope. Everybody else had sort of figured out, I think, that life would not go on as before, and yet I had a child's, selfish faith that I would get to have brunch with you in April. But this is also very amazing. I'm so happy to get to do this with Books and Books too, I used the bookstore that I bike to. I know it's strange. I don't know who I'm looking at exactly. I take on faith that there are others out there.
We have no idea.
We don't know. I'm glad we can see each other. I did an event with Books and Books for my wonderful brother's book launch, where thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, but I feel like now I'm have my Zoom legs. At that time, it still felt. It doesn't feel normal, right? But
it's weird.
It's weird. And can I ask, so this is, I think, maybe the last event of your virtual book tour, or one of the...
I think it's like my last bookstore event. I've got a couple of things I'm doing towards the end of May, but...
Yeah, and what has it been like to launch this book at this unprecedented, bonkers time?
I keep saying, although actually at this point, it's like really precedented. It's been precedented for a year now. And I've said this before, but it's very strange because I'm sitting in the same chair using the same apparatus that I do everything with. And so it's nice and it's strange, and I really miss free hotel rooms.
Oh,
I really only became a writer for the free hotel rooms, and so that's a pang that is in me.
it's so funny you mentioned that. I love I have no favorite. They all tie for favorite. I feel that way about your work. Kevin Brockmeyer, Kelly. There are a handful of people where like it all ties for my favorite. But there's a story in this where a woman nearly dies by getting drunk in a tub. And I know I really was so close to writing you, like, I hope you're taking a victory lap and just soused in a bubble bath. And then I was like, oh, maybe that's not the thing to wish anyone.
Yeah, it's not an autobiography.
But I do miss, the anonymity of the hotel room.
Yeah.
Just the beautiful anonymity and like this room that anticipated all of your desires and won't be marred by you in any way.
One of the best literary conversations, not the conversation wasn't literary, but with a literary human being, is I once had a conversation with Marilyn Robinson about the sleep timer on hotel televisions. How one of the greatest things was to turn on your TV and put on the sleep timer. And even as it happened, I thought, I can't believe I'm having this conversation with Marilyn Robinson, and it makes me so happy.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe that's a good bridge to a first question, because one of the things that I was so struck by, I feel like we have this in the shaded vein of our interests, this in common a little bit, which is so many of these stories. I thought of Bolaway. I think of this book too. I just think it's the best one. It's has everything I love about a novel. And I think when people hear linked short stories, I'm not sure what they think. Maybe they think like, some characters recur or something, and they're linked by so many deeper, and that the webbing, the ligature of these stories is so funny, so dark, and so discomforting. And I kept thinking about this Lori Moore line, actually about how death is the mother of this world. And I realized that my mother was only my sibling. And family is here. Mm-hmm. And yet I felt like the great mother of the collection in some ways is death. This is now sounding less like a bridge to a question, I realize. But thinking about hotel rooms, one of the stories is set on a ferry ride. One is at this like hilariously rendered Texas water park. Does this place really exist? Can I ask?
It really exists.
Wow.
There are a couple of things in this with all my work, people say, wow, you have a great imagination. And then they tell me something that is absolutely gone from life.
Yeah.
About that recently. And I mean, including a slide called The Faust und Furious. Every single detail, and that's right. And somebody also recently said, Baby Alive. Oh my God, where'd you come up with that? I'm like, Baby Alive. I could sing you the 1970s jingle because I really wanted one.
Oh, well, it's funny with little kids. I feel like it's been such an education in like the poltergeist of desire. And I see something of myself mirrored in like my baby's conviction that like, if I just give her a fatal object, it will answer the question in her heart, like she's so sure. And she's so disappointed when like then the desire just like lands on something else, and I'm like, oh, it's hard, isn't it? I'm like that. The Mad Libs of that grammar just keeps.
It's true, but you believe it before the thing arrives.
Yes,
this is your heart's desire.
Yeah, your heart's desire, and I think that's another that came to me in this collection too. Just I was like, oh God, Elizabeth understands better than anybody I know that deep grammar that we're born with. And I just kept thinking about it. There's some of these stories are performers and, there's puppeteers. There's a woman who has not a dummy, I realize, a ventriloquial
figure.
A ventriloquial figure. It's like much more respectful than dummy. But I was thinking just about the Mad Libs grammar of the heart, right? Or like someone who's so starving for love that she doesn't understand that like that very, the enormity of that hunger is just scary. It's like that National Geographic story about that really lonely whale who was singing its love song at like this pitch that freaked all the other whales out, and so he thought the ocean was empty.
Yeah. He found all those
is what I'm saying, but But a lot of the, just sort of like the, the hand folded over a secret, or, the baby alive, just suckling forever. There is something, as idiosyncratic as these characters are, I really felt like these stories are reflective of that deep grammar of like a hidden wanting to be found, a heart that's just rapacious, and a lot of them are set in these kinds of liminal spaces, or these sort of like these theme park worlds, or the lazy river, which just feels like I metaphorically resonant in so many ways during this pandemic and just in a lifetime. I wondered about how you decide on these locations. Maybe character comes first, or maybe the conceit. I'm sure it varies story to story, but what it is about these kinds of vintage stores, museums, hotel rooms. Yeah, what it is about these spaces that feels right for a short story in particular.
I wish I had some big artistic answer to this. I also like the fact that you are so lovely about my work, and you said it's discomforting, and I went, oh, thank you. That's the compliment I want.
It is.
I'm exactly the writer I want to say it. I think so many of the settings in this collection are because I tend to write stories when I travel. Yeah. And there's not that much that's deeply autobiographical, and the settings are deeply autobiographical. They are, they're places that I went, and I did sort of psychological. Well, I can emotionally deduct Legoland, which I hate so much. If I write a story that takes place in Legoland, that is the thing that I can do to make being at Legoland or Schlitterbahn all right. Vintage stories I have a lifelong love of anyhow, and like anybody my age or younger, that there is that strangeness when suddenly the vintage stories are representations of your own childhood. Right. And you understand that it's right, that it no longer, there's the moment for everybody when something is described as vintage and it's from your childhood, and you think that's not right.
Yeah.
And then there's another moment when you see stuff and you think, yes, that was so long ago.
So strange.
This would be in nobody's home now. And that probably happened for me maybe 10 years ago with stuff from the 70s.
I've got to embarrass you now, because no one, only a terrible egotist would ever do this for themselves. But this passage is so brilliant. And I was thinking, one of the weirdnesses of time slowing down, but yet having these children who grow unstoppably in this uncanny way and just keep iteratively swallowing the last child, like that Joy Williams line, children vanish without dying. It's deeply strange. But I sort of still feel like I'm 14 most of the time. So that's also a little confusing about aging. And the vintage store is like such a weird indicator. Am I not going to be able to find it's I was thinking about how people are always asking me questions about world building as if it is a Legoland, and I think like the magic of synecdoche in these stories, like what you can evoke with. Now I'm not going to. Good grief! It's you guys will have to buy the book so you can read this for yourself.
We can end the conversation now.
Oh, good grief! I'm sorry. I have my flagging system has failed me. But it's basically about, like the palette of your childhood, right? Where like re-encountering these like avocado hues and just like the odors, right? Where it's like, oh my God, now this is like tuna scented and and consigned to history in this strange way. And I was at one of these bars, this is obviously pre-pandemic, but where they kind of cater, somehow the bar has anticipated exactly how old you are. And the playlist is like meant to cast this acoustic spell upon you so you still feel young. So it was like all of these like songs from the 90s, and I resented that the bar, it was working, right? And I was like, no, Nelly, like, it was sort of like the blackout shades on the portholes. And they were like, maybe you're still 15. Like,
you're the equivalent for people my age is the soundtrack at Whole Foods.
Oh, right.
I'm not kidding. You walk in and it's like, Men at Work. I love this song.
Right. And doesn't it feel a little bit, it's like condescending, right? You're like, I know that I'm advancing towards death. You can't.
But there's that little bit of happiness that you also feel when you hear a song you haven't heard in a long time, and you think, yes, I will spend a lot of money for marinated.
Yeah, it's true.
I have not been in a Whole Foods for.
I know. Well, yeah, now I'm very nostalgic for all of these experiences. But it is something about the disorientation of aging. Even reading these stories too, like there's a woman who is 52 and she's sort of describing her shock at, someone says, well, of course, this woman, Florence, who was, a great friend of mine and, 20 years older than me almost. And she's older now. And that's just math. And I just liked like the flatness of, well, that's just math for you. Because it is so weird that the world is haunted by these people whose lives overlap with your lives. And I'm not on social media. I'm sure there's another layer of complication. If you can just sort of like watch, figures who once cast such a shadow over your own life and now are sort of vestigial in some way, changing in time. But I think there's something deeply uncanny about that. Me too. And the way that we betray each other just by changing in time, And I was thinking that a little bit about kind of family, which is, I know, a perennial, endlessly fascinating to me as well. And just the kinds of family in this book. So I guess my question, I have a brother who's a nonfiction writer. And to me, this sometimes feels like a great betrayal of like a code that I internalized, where I'm like, you can be honest, but just do it like, speaking of ventriloquy, pretend you're a horse on the moon and then say what you need to say, I guess as this, you've written other collections. Do you ever feel like your own reflexive sympathies changing as you write these stories there's so many different points of view, they're children of aging parents and, that there's the water park story, which is one of my favorites. It's sort of a man who late in life falls in love with another man, leaving, he's lost his wife and he has this sort of second chapter that feels very astonishing to him. But yeah, I guess I just wondered about that reflexive sympathy shifting around book to book.
I think so. I think we both, you and I, wrote short story collections that are not this one, my last one, that are largely about parental fears. Mm-hmm. And I know when I was writing mine, I didn't fully realize how much that was so, and that again it felt for me ventriloquial, that somehow, not that I'm not a worried parent, I'm a very worried parent, but that if I put stuff into my fiction, I didn't have to take it on board so much.
Yeah.
Feel that way?
I do feel that way. And it's funny, people who sometimes read these things, I think they have the misapprehension that I'm much more neurotic than I am, and I do sort of feel like I'm in the lifeguard chair uselessly a lot of the time, but not to the extent that maybe the fiction suggests, I think that is a trickiness of writing stories. Sometimes I think people miss what is autobiographical. What you mentioned location as being autobiographical. But I just imagine, so two of the recurring characters in this collection, I'm saying, making eye contact with my own ghost, with the house plant. It's just, Jack and Sadie, and the structure is weird. It's really interesting because we meet them at their first wedding, and then we, there's some stories that are not Jack and Sadie stories. But I wonder, I'm sure some foolish people think that if they know you in life, they have the decoder to your fiction or something,
Yeah, I probably will just keep talking about ventriloquism, because I do use, I feel when this is a big shift in sympathies as a writer. When I was young, if you asked me about my first collection of short stories, which is now almost 30 years ago, I would have said that I was very autobiographical emotionally, and not otherwise. and that the stories were about me, even though they were about people who were much different from me. But I put in my own emotions. And now I feel like it's flipped. I don't know how I feel about novels, but for this short story collection, there are a lot of locations that are similar, and there are certain autobiographical details just because it was handy to be a magpie, and write about a wedding in a house that is very much like a wedding I went to. None of the people there are based on actual people. However, that story, and I feel like you can ruin the end of a story, but it ends with it's an English woman marrying a Dutch man, and instead of having a wedding cake, they have 3 Dutch cheeses stacked up in layers, and somebody says into the microphone, "The bride and groom will now cut the cheese." And the main character, who's an American, bursts out laughing, and that's how she discovers that that's only an American phrase, and she is the only American person at the wedding. And that is 100% autobiographical. I didn't get there. The main character begins to really that. Truthfully, that story, 80% of the anecdotes in it are autobiographical, but they didn't happen all at the same time. They happened over years of going back and forth to England with my beloved husband, Edward Carey, who is English.
Well, being so thoroughly Floridian, I mean, the details about the British, the ways that, and the way that Jack, who we later learn had an earlier life as this teenager named Lenny, isn't British, except in ways that are available to him privately. Like something about the culture collision, but also just like they're both kind of interlopers in one another's family in a way that felt to me entirely true.
But do you think it's true? Maybe I'm wrong, but don't you think that's true in general about?
In general, that I still feel like, my husband's family, it took me a long time. Like Portland generally is a pretty, relative to Miami anyway, I feel like it's like a very green and mild West, mostly this recent stretch accepted. And the codes of this other family are so different than my own. And like, I was like, we're all just going to eat watermelon salad and it's so pleasant. This really felt to me like the prelude to a terrible storm. I was like, well, batten down, and it's taken half a decade for me to really believe. I'm like, oh, there are no landmines here. We're all just going to talk at this volume and this, I don't know. But yes, it does feel really interesting. And the language of one's family is such a private one. I love that here too. Also like the violence of love in a family, and I'm going to paraphrase you badly, but one of the gifts of these stories is there will be like a sentence or an image that I feel like, in a way that novels become a little diffuse in my own mind, a story will like birth something that I can carry with me like a little polished stone, or like a spell I can cast on myself to understand this realm better. There's the water park story. Now I'm sad I missed out on the chance to go there.
No,
maybe not.
You're not sad.
That's one of my favorite lines in this collection is the deeply American verb to tube, when you're tubing, you also discover these muscles that seem to have no other purpose, right? Like I would go tubing on the Itchnatucky with my brother near UF, and I'm like, oh, there are muscles in the ass to prevent the ass from being bitten by water snakes. And I would never have known that if I had
Your whole body is prehensile if you need it to be.
It's true. It's true. But it's this image of like that floating bead. They're beads that are floating, and it's sort of like a boundary in the pool. And this little boy has just screamed at his father, like some version of whatever kids are always screaming, like, I don't love you. Like, I didn't ask to be born. I don't want to exist. And like the more patient and even keeler dad is like, you don't mean that. And then our narrator reflects, no, actually he does mean that. That's what's sort of terrible and conditional and flawed about human love, and we yell, it's like for a second, yeah, you do sort of wish like that this person that you love the most in the world didn't exist. Like, I kind of think my daughter would kill me with a rock sometimes, I think she would regret it, but like the fury in her, I'm like, wow, I'm so happy that that I can get away. But the idea, like the image of just love is being like that line, and some of the beads, it's sort of like, I love you, I hate you, I love you, I hate you, but the continuity of the love And some of your characters, I feel like they discover early on that there are gaps in that rope. It doesn't hold, actually. But I just love that image. It helped me to understand something about this place. Like, and what can be so painful, right? I think this happens in other stories too, where it's like when you make that promise, you're not a liar, right? You might not be aware that time is going to turn your promise into a lie. That's the scary thing.
True.
I love that about weddings too. I think people sort of recognize that, where we're here to witness a promise, and everyone's always like, well. You're putting some money in the pot. You're like, I'm betting on you guys. Like, here's a $300, espresso machine. Like, may it carry you to death. Like,
or not.
yeah, right. Or the one of you who invited me. Like, may it fascinate your journey elsewhere later. When you were structuring this, so I don't do this with every collection. I did it with Kevin Brockmeyer because he, like you, is brilliant and meticulous. And I knew that the order of his book, he wrote the Ghost Variations, which I know you'll love.
Yeah, I haven't read that yet.
It's 100 one-page ghost stories.
And who's better than Kevin Brockmeyer? I love his work so much.
I love his work too. But I mean, I was like, I would do this myself a disservice if I didn't read this in order, because I understood that he had choreographed an experience for me. It wasn't, you really can't skim. He's like you that way. Like I get angry thinking about anyone skimming the Souvenir Museum. I want to and I think short stories, that feels like a real mistake to me when people are like, oh, perfect for the short attention spans of our day. I'm like, are you insane? Like, this is a very demanding, this is the micropulse of language is so exquisite and intense too. So I wondered a little bit, because one of the things that I love about this collection is something will be an offhanded anecdote or the punchline to a family joke in one story. So for example, it opens with this Irish wedding, and you sort of assume, oh, this person I've fallen in love with, I know them better. I feel proprietary anyway. I'm like, there's a way where I know them better than their family, maybe. And then you discover they had this whole history totally excluded from your view. And one of the sisters says, hey, you should ask him about Lottie, his first love. And then we get to read the story. You sort of dilate this, what would have just been kind of a casual aside about, your May, December romance with this lady ventriloquist. And then we get to read about it. And in the get-go, this happens again, and it's sort of the reverse, where Jack goes to cast his shadow on this mother-daughter relationship where he is an interloper. And it's sort of revealed to him kind of casually, almost accidentally, that the story he believes about, this explanatory narrative he's kind of concocted in his privacy about why his wife is who she is, it's just not true, right? Or it's not true the way that he thought it was. She's been keeping the secret of her father's death from him. But we get to know it, which felt so generous to me. And I wondered, like, how did that come to be? Did you sort of always have in mind, was it like you would return to a story and find that moment that wanted to become its own?
Only kind of in that. So there are the 5 stories about Jack and Sadie, and I wrote them partially because I suddenly realized I had a deadline coming up. And I had pulled together all of my short stories, and they amounted to 88 pages. And I was at the end of my semester, and I don't get very much writing done when I'm teaching. And this was in 2019, and we were getting ready to, Edward and I and our kids, to go to England. And I thought, well, the only way I can write 5 stories in a fairly short period of time is if they're connected. And I'd never written any connected stories, but I love them as a form. And I thought, okay, I can do this. And I literally drafted one a day for 3 days. That was 2 Sad Clowns, the Irish Wedding, and a Splinter. And then we went to England, and I revised them for a few weeks. Hours a day, going to them, getting up early. And then when we got back, I revised. I wrote the other two, The Get-Go and Nothing Darling, Only Darling, Darling. And I had a few pieces of that already, but a pretty small shard of it. And I drafted those one a day, which is not a rate that I normally ever write short stories at. And somehow it was really interesting, and it was easier because they were connected, because I had the ability to start completely anew in form, but I didn't have to sort of think, okay, who are these people?
Right.
And it was a real pleasure. And then I revised them for a while longer. But I put them in a different order than I wrote them in the collection. And was happy by what, and actually we were talking about our mutual friend Paul Lasicki. He's the one who suggested that I put The Irish Wedding first, and then that made a lot of sense. And then I revised everything when it was in the collection together as well. But it was, a lot of it is like happy accidents or things that were preying on my mind on the subconscious level that got into the story. That made sense.
That's a good, you mentioned you do a morning swim in Barton Springs, and that made me wonder, like, where you do the writing that doesn't happen in this one space, like where you do like the dreaming part, if it's like swimming, if it, I like to walk around this place, Oaks Bottom, which is not even like a nature, it's like a place for birds. It's like a very humble, doesn't even like rise to the level of national park or anything. It's just like a lot for birds. But is Barton Springs does drafting happen there, or is that more just like getting away from these imaginary demanding people?
A bit, and I'm thrilled because this is like a running joke I have with myself, that I now think I've managed to introduce the fact that everybody should admire me because I get up early and swim at Barton Springs every morning into every single online event that I've done. This is the most exciting because I didn't have to bring it up myself. I actually connect it to Geek Love, which has a lot of swimming in it, that book.
Yeah, it does.
And I remember this was the summer after I was in graduate school, and I swam in an indoor pool every day. And I wrote a lot in my head, but I was also reading Geek Love at the same time. And it feels like it all soaked into me in a really
in the chlorinated like dream of the pool. I believe that, because it's funny as you say that, I'm thinking of Olympia with her like pointy swimming cap and this blind albino hunchback dwarf, who looks the way we all feel.
And so I swim and I write, and I probably think about Geek Love and swimming, and because she does a huge amount of thinking in the book while she's swimming.
Yeah, it's true. I had forgotten about that totally. That's so funny. I think stories, there's something about cordoning off that space.
Yeah.
Swimming pools, theme parks, vintage stores. There's something about taking a space that's a little bit removed from ordinary time. And then you have permission to dive. You get to escape time a little bit, the honor of it or something. I don't know. I have to tell myself that a lot of writing happens off the page, because otherwise it's good to be like relatively self-employed, because no other employer, I often think, would accept this dismal rate of return. Now all of my internal auditors are like, what? Elizabeth wrote these stories that fast and they're amazing. They're like, you've been...
No, I've been thinking about them for a long time.
That is true, I think. I think there's something about that, right? Where like it's the way like an avalanche feels spontaneous. Like forces were building for some time, before that could happen. I was thinking too a little bit, I don't even know how to make this a question. This is me trying to like balloon animal twist a question out of just like admiration and like shock. These endings are perfect. Every single dismount felt perfectly surprising. They all alluded, every single, if we were talking about Mad Libs, whatever the autofill of the mind does, none of them ended where I expected them to. Every one of them gave me this like, the joy of having had a complete experience of some mystery. And then I was like, how is she doing this? And so please tell me that at least some of them you had to revise to get there, or does it really do you wait for like that spontaneous leap,
No, I had to revise them, but I also, I mean, like my goal always at the end of a short story is that that my favorite short stories are the ones that are surprising and strange and don't necessarily make sense.
Or they have like a kind of a dream logic. I felt
Yeah.
like I was like, yeah, that's right. Although you
Yeah.
couldn't really, the rightness of them is sort of the way that like the plot of a dream exists in kind of this stew of insanity.
And I think deep down, I wish I could write a story that was nothing like that, but I know that it would be illegible and maddening and not satisfying to me either. But I mean, I don't know how you feel about story endings.
It's interesting because even when I get one where I'm like, that feels right to me, it does seem that many readers disagree with my perception. Like I think, and maybe the story form generally, right? My grandfather, when I published my first story, it was available online when he was still alive, and he kindly read it, and then he called me, on the landline, the Cadillac landline. Speaking of vintage stores. And he was just like, that was a good story, Karen. And that magazine's very smart because you got to buy the magazine to see how it ends. And I was like, it's done, Papa. And he was like, oh, well, finish the damn story. Like he was like, that's lazy. Figure out what happens to them, Like, I thought I had like gotten to this plateau, and I was like, now you can see,
I realized I've unplugged Hold on. So I just got that little message saying that my computer was almost out of juice.
Oh, and I just looked up and I was like, I forget because I'm greedy that I'm supposed to let the others ask you questions. I wondered, at other events, have you been reading a little bit? Do you feel like reading something?
I'm happy to if people are interested. I have to say, every time I've mentioned it to a bookstore type person, they have said people hate readings. I'll read a paragraph.
Would you read a paragraph? Yeah, then you don't. Then I don't have to do it.
This is my last chance, and everybody has to listen to me. And this is a paragraph. I have no idea whether it's going to make any sense, but it's probably the paragraph that I'm vainest of in the entire. I have to look at the table of contents and see where it is. And this is just two people on a date, and it is one paragraph from. Two Sad Clowns. And they brought a drunk man home to who they don't know, home to his apartment. A man and woman on a date. Had he made his bed, or had somebody made it for him? The white sheet folded with precision over a sky blue blanket, white pillows that had been plumped and smoothed. Sadie herself had not made her own bed in years. It was one of the most liberating things about being a grown-up. Jack, though, was a maker of beds. I feel I should have warned, it's kind of a long paragraph. Jack, though, was a maker of beds, a love letter you mailed to yourself in the morning that arrived at the end of the day. They never should have married, probably. They couldn't know all the ways their marriage would be mixed. She was punctual, he was late. She would never willingly drink a gin and tonic. She had a sweet tooth. He liked bitter greens and smoked haddock and oversalted his food. He didn't drive, and she didn't like to. He would have denied it, gregarious. She was a misanthrope of the purest kind, one who didn't let on but cloaked her misanthropy with manners. He didn't mind a bit of thievery, restaurant salt and pepper shakers he took a fancy to, flowers from other people's gardens, while she was a rigid moralist about ill-gotten gains, returned every extra bit of money, corrected sales clerks who rang her up wrong. They were both cowards. She was an only child. He had 3 sisters. He liked horror movies. She liked dirty jokes. He was deep down a prude. They were both bad with money. All the dives where they drank in those days are gone. That's how old they are now.
Yeah. You know what? This is not a cultural touchstone for anybody probably, but I used to love The Rats of Nim. This was an 80s cartoon. And there's like these 2 crows where they like collide in the sky and all this like yarn tangles up between them. And then they just like decide to make that their home. And I think what I love about Jack and Sadie is like, oh God, it is this life is so brutal. It's sort of amazing that we get to decide anything about it. You inherit this family, but then maybe there's an accident and you can just make that your destiny. You get to find this co-author, and it's very unlikely. Like, just the fact that they hold on is so mysterious. It's amazing. And then it's like the way you hold it, Elizabeth, where it's like you can kind of back up from the canvas and there's this ride detachment. It never feels sentimental. It's like, also, guess what? All the grackles on the line are doing the same thing. Like this, I feel this as a mother, right? That just discomforting feeling of, some of the parents, I think, they have this apprehension that their child is they quietly know, like, the most special human ever to live. And even, and then you'll go to like some like Mommy and Me class and you're like, this is grotesque. And that we're just the victims of like a look at all this Lynchian repetition, but that's never how it feels on this side of the porthole. Anyway, I love Jack and Sadie, and I love that's my favorite genre, I think, is like the how did you meet, or because it's always it's a crazy accident that and people love to tell that story because I think everyone recognizes what it's like. Even a wedding, I never thought I'd have one. I also was like, ugh, what an expense, and I'm going to elope. And then in the end, we did have one, and I think it was so moving to me that all these people from different parts of your life, somehow they're like, okay, the carbon footprint will reveal that we believe this is the best thing that could have happened. Like, if I went missing, like if like someone in that Oaks Bottom like abducted me, people would be sad, but they weren't all gonna like board planes to like, you know what I mean? It's like only the wedding that everyone's like, I had a baby. They're like, good for you, but no one. The only time people are like, I'm gonna buy a flight.
We gotta witness this.
I'm gonna dance. It's like I'm gonna dance in honor of your promise. It's like wild. I don't know.
It's true.
This was, and I know I got to take other questions, but I found the paragraph that this isn't even a favorite because that would then, I feel like I would be perjuring my feeling for the rest of the book. But this is in the story Birdsong from the Radio, and I really don't cry. I feel like there's some powerful disconnect between like whatever's happening here in my eyeballs, but this made me cry, and this is part of the tonal ricochet of the work. And I do think sometimes when I read about mental life in other people's work, not to name names, but I'm like, is it just this droning lyricism? Is that how people experience their mental life? They're just like galloping along in iambic pentameter, ruminating about things. Like this is so much closer to like the circus of being in a body to me. This is a woman who lost everything. She lost all of her children. She stuffs like a hot challah loaf into her mouth at the bakery and pretends it's a child. And she is approached by the father of the driver of the babysitter who killed all these children years and years and years ago, for context. Madeline never got a chance, said Mike Wooster, to redeem herself, but you could be redeemed. He's addressing this woman who's been, we don't have a good word for it, right? Not orphan, but a mother with no children. He laughed, or a part of her did, a living thing sheltered in a cave inside her. Redeemed, she said, like a skee ball ticket. Like a soul, your soul can be redeemed. Too late, she said, soul's gone. Where, he said. Where do you think, she said. And then he took her hand. This only feels like hell, he said. I know. I do know. She shook her head to refuse his sympathy. She could smell the distant desiccation of it. No, why had he come here? She could not be redeemed, a coupon, a ticket. He had a dead child too. She could feel it twitching through his fingers, the sorrow, the guilt, like schools of tiny flicking fish who swim through bone instead of ocean. He was not entirely human anymore either. Indeed, she could hear the barking dog of his heart, wanting an answer. Her heart snarled back, but tentatively. I felt myself so close to crying. Wouldn't that be horrifying? How would we handle that if I cried on our Zoom? But these moments that, like, to inhabit a moment that fully, also the generosity of the skee ball ticket, like these stupid words we have to use. I think that's what I also, it's just really, you people, whoever are out there, you're lucky to be alive to read Elizabeth McCracken. I was this is going to be a weird aside, but when I had Ada, who you met, there's this way where it's like the birth of a child is so astonishing, but then I was aware too that I was at like the car wash of births, you know what I mean? Like these sweet people. And like, I was so grateful to them. You know, one woman was like, I'm blessed to be alive to see this. And I felt that she meant it. And I like went back and wrote her a card. I was like, thanks, because I know you see blood and guts in high school all day long. And, anyway, let me see what's in the chat before I start crying at your words on a Zoom. Nobody wants that. Kevin Brockmeyer says, just from Kevin, I love your work too, the both of you. Thanks, Kevin.
That's so nice.
It's so nice. I'm just going to start ventriloquizing the dead and talking about how much they love us. That felt so good. You ladies look great. Flannery O'Connor. I think Michael Ray, who is an editor we both love, who edits both of our stories, is here too, just to shout him out, because that man is the most brilliant, the best person to play skee ball with.
He really, I've never met him in person, but this was in 2005, I think, and I was working on the first of two novels I wrote that never went anywhere. And I had written this novel that my editor then actually, after a couple of years of working on it, turned it down and said, it's just not going to work. Yeah. And Michael happened to email me, first time he ever emailed me, and said, do you have a short story? And I went, can you give me 48 hours? And I pulled a short story out of the novel, which was the idea that anybody was waiting to read something that I had written seemed amazing and exactly what I needed to hear then.
Oh, but I love knowing that that's possible too. I've had very few, but like that feeling of like the Rocky Balboa montage where you're like, wait a second. Like sometimes you just need that kick to
the deadline,
Yeah. So was that how you came into story writing, was through Michael, or?
I had written, my first book is a collection of short stories, and then I started writing novels, and I really thought, I'm really a novel writer. There's one short story in Thunderstruck that I had written that was an idea that was so clearly a short story. So I had like one old short story, and then Michael asked me about whether I had a short anymore, and I started writing them. But it really was that request put me back in short stories.
Yeah, if you're out there, Michael Ray. I always feel like that is such an egoless enterprise, editing stories, and they just get much better. I don't. It's always like there's something so satisfying about that iterative process. And I also think, having had the experience, like when you have a good editor, a lot of it really is like it's a trust fall, right? You're like wordlessly arrowing towards the same target. And on the very, very rare occasions where I haven't felt that, it's horrible. It's a horror. You feel like a weird I don't know. I'm like, like I see why it was expedient to lop off all these branches, but look what we're left with. I got a question for you. Let's see. Kristen Arnett is here, and she says, read. So we have obliged. Hi, Kristen. This is so nice. The chat box is haunted with all our friends. It's so cool. Let me see. More of a comment than a question. You ladies look great. From Kelly, Link, Gavin, and Ursula. Are you kidding? Maybe we're dead. This is so nice. I like it. That's how compliments make me feel. We were talking about people who have a hard time metabolizing compliments. It doesn't mean they don't like them.
I know.
It just means like, give us a little time.
I was telling you that when my students said, I know you don't like compliments. And I love compliments so much. I just look awkward when I receive them. But that awkwardness is happiness and ego.
Right. I feel the same. It's like those old Kool-Aid Man commercials where it's whoa. Let's see. I think a lot of readers are interested in the physical process of writing. I am interested in this too, because I feel like I used to just be a maniac and write at all times, and I was very selfish in that way. And now with children, their demands are relentless, and I really feel like a story in progress is like a succubus on the desktop, stealing my children's like rightful attention. So, what times of day are there rituals?
I certainly wrote less when my kids were little because my kids are older than yours. I've got a 12-year-old and an about to be 14-year-old, which astonishes me. The thing, your children have been getting older during the pandemic. My children have gotten taller than me during the pandemic, which is
That's a very strange amount. So my son completely correlates height, intelligence, and age, which is uncomfortable for me because I'm 5'1". So he's always like, Daddy is older than you. And the quiet rider is like, Daddy's much smarter than you.
I am 5 foot tall, so tell him it's wrong.
He's wrong. He'll figure it out in adolescence, probably. But what a weird, that is such a surreal threshold, I'm sure, to see. And am I deluded to think that maybe writing gets a little bit easier when they're older? Probably not, right? But
it gets much easier. It's funny. I'm still sorry. I told a student I wrote quite a bit when my son Gus, who's now almost 14, was newborn. Because one child who's a newborn, that seemed relatively easy to me. And I told that to a student who then came back like 3 years later and said, why did you say that to me? It was horrible and hard. I felt like a failure. And I went, God, I had forgotten to put my usual writer on advice, which is that it's so individual and that, what's easy for one person is not easy for another. And the right process for you is not the same right process for somebody else. But it is true that when you're no longer worried that somebody will turn on the bathtub and drown themselves, or you're pretty solid that they know how to go up and down stairs, it's much
one of my very favorite lines is this couple who have their tiny 4-year-old child. My son is 4, and it's something like, there's so many ways to die of self-confidence. I like it. So my kids have such conviction that they can really do. I'm like, is this what it's like to live in Silicon Valley? They have this like baseless confidence that they can do most things, this like Elon Musk level of confidence that like they can drive cars or,
I think it's just childhood and wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's true. It does feel like a miracle to me anytime anything is finished, and not in the way that I believe. Like it doesn't. I remember a friend of mine, Wells Towers, saying there is no party. That was his craft lecture, which was so hilariously depressing, and it was basically about the anticipation of like some kind of elation or like you're finishing something, and it's just with you for so long that by the time you ship a book off, you're just crawling towards your new catastrophe. You're just sweeping up the balloon scraps. Like a party might have happened, but you missed it somehow. Now let me see. I have to say, like, it's very exciting to look in the comments box and see the writers we most admire here. Thank you guys for coming. Do you prefer writing novels or short stories? You seem to toggle so easily between both. Is one ultimately more satisfying? And Christina wants me to add, which I feel, she's also a remarkable memoirist. It's true.
I like both. And I think just recently have I sort of come to think of myself as equally both a novelist and a short story writer, that before it was, I'm a short story writer. No, I'm really a novelist. This is the form I like. And then I wrote a couple of novels that did not persist. And then I wrote a short story collection. I went, I'm really a short story writer, actually. And now I sort of think it's okay. I can toggle back and forth. I write one or the other. I don't write short stories while I'm working on a novel or vice versa. But yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so these, because I had the idea that maybe these and Bowl Away were sort of kind of swimming through you at the same time, but
mostly not. There's Birdsong from the Radio is the oldest story, and I wrote that entirely before I wrote Bowl Away. And there might be one or two other stories that I wrote before Bowl Away, and then I started writing Bowl Away, and I didn't write any short stories while I was working on it.
I see. So if cross-pollination was happening, it was sort of.
I mean, I'm always embarrassed by the things that interest me that just pop up over and over and over again in my work.
Well, but do you know Kelly Link, who's here, gave this amazing craft talk at Texas State, and I think about this now, and I feel like it has, that framing has changed the way I feel about those elements, you know, because I definitely have those too, and I'm like, oh, you again, you old Jack in the Box, you know, like just obsession. And she was saying, I think about my kinks. Like I would read any novel, you know, with I'm sorry, Kelly, if I'm paraphrasing you badly now, but you know, sort of like I don't know, when I was a kid, if there was like a unicorn galloping through fiction, even at like an age where this was no longer cool or acceptable, I would quietly read that book, you know. And
Yeah.
you know, and so like just thinking, you know, and I sort of love that, you know, or like Russell Banks, I feel like school buses show up in his fiction all the time. You can't keep a bus out of that man's fiction. And I read some interview with him where he was just saying, well, as a rural kid, the school bus was like the sun coming over the hill. Like it was just the portal to the world and education and culture and all this other stuff. And he's like, and my job is just to make that signify for the reader. Anyway, this made me feel better when like yet another alligator crawls into something. And I'm like, I'm like, but this is set in the Dust Bowl. What are you doing here? You know?
Yeah, alligators, and you wrate beautiful alligators.
Oh,
That seems
I love them.
that seems so exciting, and I feel like I had a grad student once say to me, "You sure do like haircuts." And I went,
I love in this book the
do love
portals. I love something about the roundness of that, and like it feels like a story to me, and also it feels true of like this terrible problem of like our architecture, where it's like what you can know about somebody versus what they're experiencing in their deep privacy. It's just a problem.
there are a lot of boats in this book, and that
Yeah.
maybe I'll just take the Russell Banks approach and go, yes, they're deeply meaningful. I like boats.
I love boats. Who doesn't love? Oh God, I love boats. I love
Yeah.
boats. There's something about like the way it is like a parentheses or something, right? You're like moving in a parentheses at sea.
True.
What is it? I love it too, though. Or just curated experience. It's like also even like the shabbiness of what I don't know. I felt that in these vintage stores in Portland sometimes. It's almost like going to like community theater where it's deeply important for someone to believe that you think they're like a British governess, and you're like, okay, like I'll oblige. You know? And I feel sometimes I'm like, wow, you really think you have this deep conviction that I might want all of this junk. And I'm like, I'll do it. I want it now. It's so it's that, I don't know, the very mysterious, like, there's a character in this book that was another favorite moment, because I have just never seen this rendered, but it happens all day long, where a woman keeps saying of her dead son, he had a special love for you. He loved you particularly. And it's stranger than a lie. It's like asking someone to be a co-signatory on your fantasy of the past so that it could become true. Yeah. And I was like, who can write about that weird, wordlessly brokered contract? You know, like it, I don't know. But the way these deeply suspenseful moments often happen, like inside of a conversation, that I think, like, if you were to read it, like the transcript of it, it would reveal none of that depth and strangeness. And that's what I think fiction is so great at. Movies are fine, TV is good. I've certainly streamed a lot, but you don't get behind the porthole in the same way. I don't know. At that same time, I was wondering, like, if, you know, people always ask me this too with hope. They're like, is something in development? Has something been optioned? Like, I think they like recognize this as like the best hope for, for a short story. But are you working on something longer now?
I have sort of, for the first time in my life, I'm working on 2 small books at the same time, and I've never done that. And so my semester is about to end, and I'm trying to think of what.
So you can see the meadowland.
Yes.
Of summer.
I love teaching, but I have to say, one of the things that I miss this year is that there won't be any end of year events. And there are 2 events where I show up and I get to meet my students' parents, which I love. It's my favorite thing. I have a colleague who went, "You like that?" I'm like, "No, I love it." And I make my favorite joke, which is that I say to somebody's parents, "I'm a fan of your work," and then I point at their kid. And then there's usually this final event, which is for a prize that the university gives out for writing, that has an open bar and free appetizers. And that's the one at which I am openly drunk with a plastic glass of warming white wine and going, "See you later." And this, like, there's a ceremonial end of time of the school year and sentiment. And then there's this really nice party where I don't have to. I've seen
like that.
Everybody, their parents are there.
It's so both are true, right? I feel the same way. Like, I always adore my students, and then there's always a part of me that's like, now I'm gonna forget everybody's names. You know?
No, it's Karen time.
Time to be with my imaginary friends. You know,
I feel just that way. And now this year we don't have any of those parties. And I really, I don't know. It was a real ritual for me. I'm not sure exactly what I'll do to.
I feel this way about this book event. I promise it will happen in minutes, probably, where then I'll just shut my computer. And that's so, I don't know. You have this adrenalized longing to go right to the bar with like Kevin, Kelly Link, Kristen Arnett, all of our friends who are here. I got maybe this is a good question to go out on, because I've been like neglecting my duties as the moderator to just chortle with you. But who would deny me this pleasure at this stage of our pandemic? Carrie wanted to know, is there a writer who you feel like doesn't get enough attention, someone that you'd like to recommend to?
Who do I think doesn't get enough? I feel like there must be.
It's like all writers, right? I'm like,
I'm going to repeat myself. Partly because Gavin and Kelly are here, and they just republished one of my favorite books, which is called Martha Moody by Susan Stinson, who is a wonderful writer whose work I've loved for a long time. And Small Beer Press also published her immensely beautiful novel, Spider in a Tree. But Martha Moody is a fantastic book. And you can
I was thinking
find it at an independent bookstore near you, including books.
Yeah, absolutely. Elwyn Cotman, another small beer book, Dance on Saturday. Oh, I love this collection. Deeply, deeply strange. Really so funny and scary. And Kevin Brockmeyer, guys, everyone should buy Elizabeth book, and also the Ghost Variations. It's just the perks.
So I'm going to pop out now and say this conversation has been incredibly discomforting. And you have an open invitation to come to Books and Books and hang out in the courtyard and head to the bar at some point. I hope that's going to happen in person. Truly. Thank you so much for being with us, with Books and Books. Because I know Kristen Arnett is out there, I just want to plug With Teeth coming out June 1st. We're going to be hosting a virtual conversation with her. So please, sign up and come. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for your work. Karen, love you. Love you both. I think there's a lot of love out there. I can tell you there are people watching.
Oh, good.
Right? You're not alone. You're not alone. So thank you to everyone watching everywhere.
Congratulations, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. Thanks, Christine.
Bye, guys.
Bye,
See
ladies.
you soon.
Bye. Love you.